Welcome to Once Upon a Screen Time. Today is the last series for October, and I have chosen to do the pilot for the originals. Let's go. Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, better known as New Orleans, there lived a very dysfunctional vampire family known as the Michelsons. In this twisted fairy tale, we aren't dealing with your average enchanted forest or talking animals. Oh no, this is a tale full of vampires, witches with attitude, werewolves who can't stay out of trouble, and centuries-old grudges. Welcome to the originals, a show that follows the Michelson siblings, Klaus, Elijah, and Rebecca, as they fight, backstab, and occasionally team up to rule the supernatural world while making some of the worst life choices imaginable. Our story begins, fittingly titled Always and Forever, where sibling loyalty is more of an optional suggestion than an actual rule. So grab yourself a little vampire blood or some wine and prepare for the fairy tale retelling of the originals, where eternal life means eternal drama, and family reunions often end in threat, betrayal, and a murder or two. Our story begins with Klaus Michelson, the world's most emotionally volatile vampire-werewolf hybrid, returning to New Orleans, the city he once ruled with all the subtlety of a wrecking ball. Now, as any reasonable vampire with anger management issues would, Klaus decides to pop back into town unannounced, despite the fact that New Orleans is now under the control of his former protege, Marcel. You see, Marcel has taken over the city's supernatural scene and has it running with military precision. Witches, vampires, and werewolves are all kept in check, with Marcel playing the role of king. Klaus is less than thrilled about this because if there's one thing Klaus loves more than a good tantrum, it's being in control. Naturally, Klaus can't let Marcel have anything without throwing a fit, and thus begins our supernatural power struggle. Quick note, never leave a city if you can't handle someone else running it better than you. In every twisted fairy tale, there's a noble, self-righteous character who thinks they can fix everything, and in the story, that role is filled by Elijah Michelson. Elijah is Klaus's older brother and the self-appointed moral compass of the family. He's the kind of guy who dresses in tailored suits no matter how messy things get, and speaks in an accent that says, "I take myself very seriously." Elijah loves his siblings, especially Klaus, despite the fact that Klaus's hobbies include murder, betrayal, and burning bridges. When he catches wind of Klaus's New Orleans trip, Elijah decides to follow him because, in Elijah's mind, the best way to solve a problem is to talk it out. It's a nice thought, but in a world of vampires and witches, words are the least effective weapons. Despite the sheer impossibility of ever reforming Klaus, Elijah arrives with his usual always and forever motto and prepared to mend family bonds with a pep talk and maybe a shoulder pat. Us, the audience, are fully aware that Klaus might interpret this as cue to do something drastically destructive. By the way, if your family motto is always and forever, prepare to be disappointed. No fairy tale is complete without a powerful curse and a group of witches wielding magical mayhem. In New Orleans, the witches are under Marcel's control, forbidden from using magic unless he gives them permission. This doesn't sit well with Sophie Devereaux, one of the city's witches who's had enough of Marcel's rule. Sophie is the classic fairy tale character who stirs the pot and creates just enough trouble to bring everyone together. She has a plan to overthrow Marcel, but she needs Klaus's help to pull it off. This is where things get truly interesting, or as interesting as they can get when you're manipulating a 1,000-year-old vampire with the impulse control of a toddler. But Sophie isn't just stirred in trouble for the sake of it. She's got a personal vendetta and a bit of leverage. Haley, a werewolf who's miraculously pregnant with Klaus's child. You heard that right. Klaus Michelson, the most unstable vampire werewolf hybrid in history, is about to be a father. Apparently, all it takes to bond a family is an unexpected supernatural pregnancy. What I'm getting is, if you want to manipulate a vampire, find his unborn child. In typical fairy tale fashion, a baby is just what the story needs to make things even more complicated. Talking about Haley, a werewolf with questionable taste in men, who happens to be carrying Klaus's baby. This unexpected pregnancy is treated as a miracle, though it's unclear whether it's a miracle or just a curse in disguise. Elijah, ever the optimist, sees this baby as a chance for Klaus to redeem himself. He believes that fatherhood might just be the thing to bring out Klaus's softer side. The rest of us, however, know better. Klaus's idea of bonding time with his unborn child is probably just not murdering everyone in the room. But Elijah is convinced that this child will make Klaus see the light and maybe stop throwing people through the windows. Meanwhile, Haley is basically along for the ride, which is unfortunate since the ride involves vampires fighting over her and witches wanting to use her as leverage. She's the damsel in distress, except instead of dragons, she's dealing with an immortal sociopath who happens to be her baby's father. A little tip. If you're going to have a magical child, maybe try to make sure that the father doesn't have a murder record spanning several centuries. Every fairy tale needs a villain, and in the story, the villain is Marcel, or at least Klaus thinks he is. Marcel is charming, ruthless, and has managed to turn New Orleans into his personal kingdom, where witches and werewolves stay in line or suffer the consequences. Klaus, of course, is deeply offended that Marcel dared to build a life for himself in Klaus's old city. So instead of moving on like a well-adjusted person, Klaus decides he wants it back. He launches into an over-the-top power struggle with Marcel, trying to prove that he is still the king of New Orleans. Because apparently, being 1,000-year-old doesn't stop you from being territorial. Marcel, to his credit, is having none of it. He has spent years building this empire and isn't about to let Klaus waltz in and ruin it. The tension between them is as thick as an enchanted forest, both of them determined to win. It's a classic fairy tale power struggle, except instead of battling with swords, they have fangs and overly dramatic monologues. As the episode progresses, we are reminded of the Michelson family motto, always and forever. This sounds lovely in theory, but in practice, it's just an excuse for endless betrayals and some serious trust issues. Klaus, Elijah, and Rebecca are as loyal to each other as cats are to water, with each sibling having their own version of family loyalty. Klaus sees loyalty as do what I say or I'll ruin your life. Elijah interprets it as I'll forgive you for the 100th time, but this is the last time, probably. And Rebecca views it as I love you, but you stab me in the back, I will stake you myself. This episode ends with Elijah convinced that he can somehow fix Klaus. Rebecca is suspiciously low-key and chilled throughout, and Klaus plotting his next move. It's a fairy tale about family bonds, but instead of love and support, it's more about betrayal, manipulation, and passive-aggressive threats. Moral of the story, always and forever, is a nice idea, but maybe reconsider if your siblings are immortal and murderous. And so, we conclude the first episode of The Originals, a modern-day fairy tale filled with sibling rivalry, supernatural power struggles, and some truly terrible decisions. This story has it all. Witches with grudges, werewolves with mysterious pregnancies, and vampires who really need therapy. It's a tale of family bonds tested with centuries of grudges and unresolved issues, where happily ever after is hardly the goal. In the land of New Orleans, the Michelsons continue their quest for power, respect, and maybe just a little bit of family peace. Whether they'll succeed is everyone's guess, but one thing's for sure, they're going to make a lot of enemies along the way. So grab your garlic, Or don't, because it doesn't work on these guys. And get ready for the epic drama that is the originals, where family is everything, and also the biggest nightmare of all, the end of episode 1, but the beginning of something amazing.